Hello, I'm Richard Gisbert, and you're at The Listening Post. This week, Mexico, the presidential election there, and the media company in the middle of that story. Television stations in Syria and Pakistan are under attack over their news coverage. News Corp restructures after the scandal. The Sun, the Post, and the Times, they are a-changing. Act of Valor, the film that features trained SEALs, courtesy of the Pentagon. Mexicans vote for a new president on Sunday, July 1st. The front runner is Enrique Pena Nieto, and among the major issues in this election is his relationship with a TV company, Televisa. Pena Nieto is the candidate of the Institutional Revolutionary Party, the PRI, which once held power for 71 consecutive years. Televisa is Mexico's biggest, most influential broadcaster, and the company is accused of providing Pena Nieto with the best news coverage that money can buy. The candidate and the broadcaster both deny allegations that they were involved in a checkbook journalism arrangement that goes back to 2005. Then there's the student movement called Yo Soy 132, which has been protesting what it calls biased election coverage and is making its mark through street demonstrations and online debates. This story also has an outside element to it. Britain's Guardian newspaper, which was central in the reporting of the phone hacking scandal at News Corporation, has followed the lead of a couple of Mexican newspapers and waded into the Televisa story, which is appropriate, since Televisa is such a major force in Mexican politics that it's been described as Rupert Murdoch on steroids. That's the background. Our starting point this week is Mexico City. This is not an Aztec Spring or a Mexican version of an Arab Revolution. Mexico's democracy may have had its flaws, but it has proven to be among Latin America's most durable. One thing that young demonstrators in Mexico City do share with their counterparts in Cairo and Tripoli is a penchant for taking their protests right to the doorstep of the biggest television channel in the country.
The most surprising thing in this election is a student movement that was really created after students felt that there was extreme bias from Televisa towards the leading candidate, Enrique Pena Nieto, who represents the PRI party. So they organized marches, some of them tens of thousands of people, mostly here in Mexico City, but there were marches that happened outside of the capital.
They were down outside the university and they were protesting, holding up placards, against television bias, and then they marched to one of the main television studios for Televisa, the main television station in Mexico. It was an extraordinary moment because these are students who are protesting who come from quite privileged backgrounds. The broader message was television media needs to stay out of politics in Mexico.
Grupo Televisa is not just the biggest television presence in Mexico, it's the largest media company in the Spanish-speaking world. It started out in radio in the 1930s when the party that would become the PRI first came to power, and the two organizations grew in parallel through the television age, with Televisa acquiring publishing houses, cable companies, and football teams along the way. Since 2005, a news magazine called Proceso has been reporting what it calls a hard link between the PRI and Televisa, payments from Enrique Pena Nieto to the company for what Proceso called favourable news coverage.
The documents we found revealed a relationship between Televisa and Enrique Pena Nieto during his time as governor of Mexico State. Contracts were signed for Televisa to give Pena Nieto the kind of coverage that would not just showcase his work as governor, but would paint him as a politician who could take the country forward. As we got closer, these sorts of relationships that both Televisa and Pena Nieto wanted to keep secret became more widely known.
Pena Nieto has denied these charges and these allegations and have said there's no basis for them. He's basically challenged the documents that have been put forward. But there's a widespread perception in Mexico that there is a close relationship, and I don't think many Mexicans were very surprised to hear about these revelations.
Because that's the way that politicians and the media have long worked in Mexico. Nobody bats an eye when Pena Nieto holds one of his final rallies at a football stadium owned by Televisa. At his side, his actress wife, a soap opera star on Televisa. Enter the outsider, the UK's Guardian newspaper, which picked up the same story Processo broke and took it to a more international audience. That infuriated Televisa, which is demanding an apology, as well as the candidate and his supporters.
Well, it's having a large impact, particularly because it's used by the opponents of Peña Nieto, and they couldn't be happier than The Guardian is doing this. I would say that The Guardian has no credibility whatsoever. There is no investigation. This is a hatchet job against Televisa and Peña Nieto, and there's an ideological bent here.
These very same revelations had been made last year, but the fact that it was an international newspaper of the prestige and renown of The Guardian meant that this was a revelation which had to be taken seriously. This is not the first time in Mexico that foreign news outlets have been crucial in revealing what's been going on within the country. Sadly, we don't have that on a daily basis in Mexico.
Mexico has 4 newspapers that are read nationally: El Universal, La Jornada, Reforma, and Milenio. With their loyalties divided among 3 candidates, their ability to tilt the electoral balance is limited.
Peña Nieto estuvo en Morelia, Michoacán.
However, just 2 channels, Televisa and TV Azteca, dominate the free-to-air television market, and both favor the PRI's Peña Nieto.
This has remained a constant in Mexico, a sense that these media giants really exercise enormous power, enormous influence. There really hasn't been a very forceful, sustained movement for reform that has challenged the control that's exercised by these media.
The students now trying to redefine Mexico's media landscape call themselves Yo Soy 132, the I Am 132 movement.
Cuenta de alumnos 172236-9.
They got their start when students challenged Peña Nieto at a campaign event and then watched the coverage of that event on Televisa, where they say they were not interviewed, but the candidate's campaign staff were. Since then, the movement has organized its own presidential debate. 3 chairs were filled. The one left empty was Peña Nieto's.
Yo Soy 132.
Yo Soy 132 has since produced an election media manifesto. It's a slick piece of work, indicative of how the group has grown in the space of just a few weeks. But the audience it is reaching online in Mexico is limited.
In a country like Mexico, just slightly more than 30% of the people actually have access to internet. So it's really been a very urban environment. Like I said, it's concentrated here in Mexico City. We've seen pockets of it in other major cities like Monterrey and Guadalajara, but it hasn't been a movement that's really spread to the countryside. And that might be something that really is acting against it.
El problema con Televisa.
Both Televisa and TV Azteca are broadcast free-to-air across the country. This is where the vast majority of Mexicans get most of their information. And because both the channels do not hide their political leanings, Mexicans, especially those who don't have access to other media, think that what they see on TV is what is happening on the campaign trail. So this year, many Mexicans think that Peña Nieto, who has been covered extensively by both channels, is the best option.
The Mexican election is a story about what has not changed. A PRI politician aligned with an 80-year-old media company, together fending off the fashionable upstarts from the world of new media. And it's a story about the lasting, overarching power of what is still the mightiest medium of them all: television. Our Global Village voices now on the fight over the coverage of the election in Mexico.
We have to understand that in Mexico, around 70% of TV news comes from 2 major networks, Televisa and TV Azteca. It's quite evident that Televisa has made sure one of the candidates gets special treatment. There is also the very worrying subject of a group of lobbyists from these 2 TV networks that could get Senate and deputy seats as part of a pre-negotiation.
Now, Yo Soy 132 is a spontaneous movement originally founded by students at Ibero in Mexico City, but through social media platforms has really expanded well beyond its origins. And I do believe that without those platforms, that movement would not have been able to expand so quickly. And Peña Nieto will have to pay attention to many of its demands.
Time now for Listening Post News Bites. In Syria this week, gunmen stormed the headquarters of a pro-government television channel, Ikhbariyya TV. According to the state media, attackers broke through the gates of the compound just south of Damascus, planted explosives and shot dead 3 employees. During a visit to the site, Syria's information minister said that the 3 victims were tied up and killed in cold blood.
مجزرة حقيقية بكل معنى الكلمة عندما قاموا بإعدام.
State-owned television in Syria interrupted its normal programming to provide live coverage of the aftermath of the attack, beaming images of wrecked buildings and smoldering fires throughout the country. Although it's a private channel, its critics claim that Ikhbariyya TV has been a mouthpiece for the Syrian government. The channel has also accused Western and Arab media of a campaign of misinformation. Despite the damage to Ikhbariyya's newsroom, it did not take long for the channel to get back on the air. Still with Syria, the New York Times has had to defend itself against allegations that it bears responsibility for the death of one of its correspondents, the late Anthony Shadid. Shadid died of a severe asthma attack in Syria back in February. According to his cousin, Edward Shadid, the reporter had argued with editors from the Times the night before his trip and told his wife he was worried about the state of his health.
The phone call the night before he left, there was screaming and slamming down the phone and discussions with his editors. It was at that time that he called his wife and gave his last haunting directive that if anything happens to me, I want the world to know the New York Times killed me.
The Times has denied the allegation through its spokesperson, Eileen Murphy. The Times does not pressure reporters to go into combat zones, she said. Anthony was an experienced, motivated correspondent. He decided whether, how, and when to enter Syria, and was told by his editors, including on the day of his trip, that he should not make the trip if he felt it was not advisable for any reason. A television station in Karachi has come under attack by Tehreek-e-Taliban, a militant group known as the Pakistani Taliban. Gunmen on motorbikes sprayed the headquarters of Oj TV with bullets. No one was killed, but 2 security guards were hospitalized. A spokesman for the group told journalists that Oj TV was targeted because it was peddling the government's line and failed to represent the Taliban's views. It warned that further attacks would be launched against the station unless it changed its editorial approach. However, a senior journalist at Oj told the Committee to Protect Journalists that the shooting would have no effect on coverage. According to the CPJ, Pakistan was the most dangerous country in the world for journalists to operate in back in 2011. After a year of legal twists and turns, Rupert Murdoch's News Corporation has announced its biggest shakeup since the company was founded more than 3 decades ago. The $55 billion media group confirmed that it will divide its publishing and entertainment arms into 2 separate companies. The split will be completed over the next 12 months and will disassociate the more profitable parts of the Murdoch media empire from the toxicity of the phone hacking scandal and its effect on News Corp's newspapers, primarily those in the United Kingdom. Rupert Murdoch will continue in his role as chairman of both companies, but he will distance himself from the day-to-day running of the newspaper business by not taking on the role of chief executive. This change seems largely designed to appease unhappy shareholders at the company by walling off the money-making broadcast and film divisions of News Corp from the loss-driven and sometimes scandal-plagued newspapers at the heart of the phone hacking story. Militainment is a phenomenon we first looked at a few years ago. The relationship between the U.S. military and Hollywood is a symbiotic one, and it tends to work like this. Filmmakers get some fighter planes, helicopters, and aircraft carriers with which to make their movies, and the Pentagon gets some free and positive publicity. The U.S. military now has an office in Los Angeles where these deals are put together. The latest cinematic offspring of this relationship is called Act of Valor, and it's taken the collaboration one giant step further. The producers did not just get access to military equipment and facilities, they cast active-duty military personnel in the lead roles. This blurring of the line between Pentagon propaganda and Hollywood has now reached the stage that we're not even sure that there is a line anymore. The Listening Post's Nick Muirhead now on the ties that bind the worlds of Warcraft and film.
3, 2, 1. This thing is way bigger than we thought it was.
He could have been speaking about the film itself. Act of Valor didn't even start life as a movie. It is intended to be a simple recruitment promo, and it grew into a feature-length film that has exceeded expectations at the box office. In its first weekend in theaters, the movie raked in twice as much money as it cost to produce.
Act of Valor is essentially a new frontier in Hollywood and military collaborations. This is the first movie purporting to tell the story of super secret Navy SEALs, starring the SEALs themselves.
Action. It really kind of crosses a line of just we're allowing a production company to use some of our assets so that it provides an educational role. It crosses a line into something else. I mean, the Navy looks like it's producing this.
You're no longer simply borrowing material or ideas or roles, but you're actually borrowing the military itself to make a movie. This is entirely new, and it's dangerously new. It's going a little bit beyond propaganda. It's something else entirely.
It's overlaid with all of the necessities of entertainment, the tropes and the genre of the war film, which creates a whole storyline that is basically a fantasy about war. And that's the problem. You've got something masquerading as very real that's a fantasy of war.
We contacted the Navy and the Pentagon for comment. Both declined. But Wired, the online magazine, quotes Navy spokesperson Amanda Greenberg saying, "We aim to inspire the next generation of Navy recruits to consider the special warfare community. Honestly, we are always hiring." Act of Valor is just the latest piece of what has come to be known as militainment in a relationship between Hollywood and the Pentagon that goes back decades. In 1942, a documentary series called Why We Fight was commissioned by the US government's Office of War Information to show troops why the US was fighting in World War II. In 1968, John Wayne played the lead in Green Berets, an openly anti-communist film produced at the height of the Vietnam War. And Catherine Bigelow, the director of The Hurt Locker, a film about the war in Iraq, has reportedly been given unprecedented access to classified information by the Obama administration and Department of Defense to make a film about the assassination of Osama bin Laden by the Navy SEALs. It's a collaboration that is currently under investigation by Pentagon officials for possibly breaking US secrecy laws. Thankfully for the filmmakers producing Act of Valor, there isn't any law prohibiting active duty soldiers from doing a star turn on the big screen.
This is perhaps the first Hollywood movie that arises from a boring bureaucratic document from the bowels of the Pentagon. The Quadrennial Defense Review. Every 4 years, the Pentagon asks itself, what should our strategy be and what do we need to do to make sure we're adequately postured to fulfill it? And in this case, in 2006, the document said that the country needed a lot more special operations forces than it currently possessed. The SEALs were trying to find ways to boost their public profile, their public persona, and it so happened that this film production company was interested in making some commercials for the SEALs. That began a series of conversations that eventually led to the making of Act of Valor.
So there was an interest from the SEALs saying, look, there's so much interest about us. I mean, the SEALs are in so many movies, they're in so many television shows, and just in the last year, they've been in the news so much. If there's so much interest about them, then let's at least kind of control it and try to get it close to what we actually do.
They got live fire way more than blanks.
I have some friends who are Navy SEALs, and they're very close to the people who made the film, and that was their explanation to me was, look, we just didn't want to be portrayed the way Hollywood has always portrayed us. We wanted one accurate film out there.
It's a singularly positive message. So it creates an audio-visual atmosphere in which things look like the military and things become militarized. When you bring that graphic style and you incorporate all the kind of high-tech weaponry and graphics into war films, you have a kind of a total audio-visual atmosphere that renders the military a very positive force in society.
And that is what critics find troubling about the partnership between Hollywood and the military. The Pentagon is open about what it calls the Top Gun effect, when the 1986 Tom Cruise film drove up recruitment figures for the US Navy and Air Force by 500%. These films are fictional, but the impact they have on society can be very real.
I'm gonna send you up against the best. You two characters are going to Top Gun.
Top Gun was enormously popular, and I think it probably was part of the mobilization of mind, if you will, the training of American sight and vision so that the wars that the administration was engaged in were made to seem much more legitimate and okay.
Most people in the defense establishment love them. These kinds of publicity efforts are, viewed as a critical part of keeping the public on the side of the military.
Let me tell you how the world really works.
And it's not just active valor. Active valor is just a particularly striking example of a phenomenon that's so deeply ingrained in Hollywood that we barely even notice it exists.
There's been a clear escalation in the military entertainment complex. Soldiers have replaced actors. A director has been given special access to military files. And there's a barrage of films coming out every year with some element of Pentagon involvement. But if these films are weapons in an information war, then who is the enemy?
Well, I find the idea of the military entertainment complex to be extremely interesting, especially in the past. There seems to have developed a really unhealthy relationship between the military and filmmakers. And I guess the word that comes to mind is propaganda. America is a country where there's a huge amount of distrust of government, so that I think if any effort to make wars that are illegitimate seem legitimate will be treated with some skepticism. But on the other hand, if it comes from movies, hey, we all love movies, and they're likely to be more believed, even if they're saying things that are straight out of the Defense Department.
And I will leave no one behind.
Hollywood, for all its creativity, is not an original place. They see an idea that works, and they're just going to use it over and over and over again. So my guess is you're going to see a lot more active valors in the coming years.
A lot more recruitment promos dressed up as feature films. Brought to you by Hollywood's industrial military entertainment complex, otherwise known as militainment.
More Global Village Voices now on the world of militainment.
Active Valor is presented as this documentary-style depiction of life in the Navy. And although a filmmaker and artist should feel free to experiment and toy with the constraints of the form, here it seems to be used to be pushing a very specific agenda. Thank heavens that the action sequences are so poorly conceived and the acting so terrible, because if this thing were watchable, it might be dangerous.
It's Active Valor's big selling point, the degree of collaboration between the filmmakers and the military, the fact that it has real active duty Navy SEALs, real military hardware, and even real bullets. You can see why filmmakers and the military would want to get in bed with one another. If you're a filmmaker, you get to use authentic military hardware, real weapons, and if you're the military, you get to be portrayed in a favourable light, but I'm not sure that the viewer in the middle gets the best of the deal.
Finally, in the era of the internet, no self-respecting election campaign would be complete without some low-budget viral video that offers a different take on candidates spending big money in pursuit of political power. Now, it's Mexico's turn. Carlos Jazeera, a music producer with a taste for tunes that come from across the U.S. border, has taken the Bruno Mars hit Lazy Day, given it a political twist, a Latin feel, putting Enrique Pena Nieto and other prospective El Presidentes through the online ringer. This is called Pena Nieto, Just a Puppet. It's our web video of the week. We'll see you next time at The Listening Post.
No importa que no sepa hablar inglés, yo no quiero más que el poder. Por eso canto esta canción en prole, naco y española, todo por un voto a mi favor. Te daré 500 pesos, un abrazo y muchos besos para que me recuerdes como el hombre de tus sueños y un póster para tu pared. Me dicen que no soy más que un títere, un producto más que vender. No hagas caso, es un rumor, ve que fue quien lo inventó. I'll do anything just to be the president, just for your vote.
Soy el pez, el tabasqueño y hablo ají de nacimiento. Ají me puso Fox, no fue Enrique Pena Nieto. Mejor vota por mí, yo no ladro, yo no miento. Y más eres viejito, ya verás que te consiento. Enrique Peña, ¿cómo quieres ser mi presidente? Si tu partido ha mentido hasta con los dientes.
Piensas como yo, solo sígueme. No debe llegar al poder. México da para más. No quiero vez más.